Most bedtime stories begin with cheerful gods, shining heroes, or dazzling adventures. But tonight, we're going to do something different. We're starting with the god who rarely gets the spotlight, the one who doesn't crash weddings like Zeus, doesn't stir up storms like Poseidon, and doesn't throw wild parties like Dionysus. No, tonight we're talking about Hades, the quiet ruler of the underworld. Now, don't panic. This isn't going to be a scary ghost story. In fact, when explained slowly, and I mean very slowly, Hades's tale becomes surprisingly soothing. Think of him less as a terrifying figure and more as the ultimate introvert, a god who prefers peace and order, who minds his own business, and who just happens to live underground with a three-headed dog. Hades isn't the villain you think he is. He's the god of boundaries, of wealth, of inevitability. And if you're trying to fall asleep, nothing is more comforting than inevitability. Hades was one of the Olympian brothers, but unlike Zeus and Poseidon, he didn't spend much time meddling in mortal affairs. He wasn't chasing after endless lovers or throwing lightning bolts at unsuspecting shepherds. Instead, he stayed in his realm, quietly managing the flow of souls. The Greeks respected him, but they also feared him. They avoided saying his name directly, calling him Plauting, the wealthy one, because all riches, gold, silver, gems, came from beneath the earth. So yes, Hades was technically the god of wealth too. Imagine that. Zeus ruled the sky, Poseidon ruled the sea, but Hades ruled everything beneath the earth. He kept the dead in their place, maintained the balance of life and death, and ensured that mortals didn't wander back into the world of the living. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't evil, he was necessary, and sometimes necessity is more powerful than glory. So, as we begin this long journey through the story of Hades, remember, he's not here to frighten you. He's here to remind you that even in mythology, there's a god who values quiet, order, and boundaries. And if that doesn't sound like the perfect bedtime companion, I don't know what does. Like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments from where you're watching from. The story of Hades truly begins with his family, and what a strange family it was. His father, Cronus, ruled as king of the Titans, but he lived under the shadow of a prophecy that one of his children would rise up and overthrow him, determined to prevent this fate. Cronus chose a solution that was as bizarre as it was horrifying. He swallowed each of his children whole the moment they were born. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades all disappeared into the depths of their father's stomach, trapped in darkness, waiting for a future they could not yet imagine. Their mother, Rhea, was heartbroken. She longed to protect her children, but Cronus's fear was relentless. When her youngest son, Zeus, was born, she finally devised a plan. Instead of handing the baby over, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and gave it to Cronus. Without hesitation, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing he had consumed yet another child. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away in secret, raised in safety, far from his father's reach. Years passed, and Zeus grew strong. When the time came, he confronted Cronus and forced him to disgorge the children he had swallowed. One by one, the siblings emerged, alive but shaken, as if reborn into the world. Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia were reunited with Zeus, and together they stood as a family once more. This strange cycle of swallowing, hiding, and vomiting marked the beginning of their destiny. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, would soon rise to challenge their father and the Titans, reshaping the cosmos forever. Their childhood was not gentle, but it forged them into gods who understood struggle, survival, and the weight of fate. When Zeus freed his brothers and sisters from the stomach of Cronus, the world was thrown into turmoil. The Titans, ancient rulers of the cosmos, were not willing to surrender their power easily. What followed was the Great War known as the Titanomachy, a conflict that lasted 10 years and shook the heavens, the earth, and the seas. The Olympians, led by Zeus, stood together as a new generation of gods. Hades, though often remembered only for his later role in the Underworld, was a vital part of this struggle. Alongside Poseidon, he fought with determination, carrying the helm of invisibility forged for him by the Cyclope. This strange gift allowed him to vanish from sight, moving unseen across the battlefield, striking fear into the Titans, who never knew where he might appear. The war was brutal. The Titans were immense, ancient beings who had ruled since the dawn of time. Cronus himself was cunning and ruthless, unwilling to give up his throne. The battles echoed across mountains and oceans, with gods and Titans clashing in endless waves of power. The earth trembled, the sky roared, and the seas boiled as the struggle dragged on year after year. But the Olympians had allies. The Cyclopes, freed from their imprisonment, forged mighty weapons: Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades's helm. The 100-handed ones, monstrous beings with 50 heads and 100 arms each, also joined the fight, hurling boulders and shaking the battlefield with their strength. With these allies, the tide began to turn. Hades's role was subtle but crucial. He was not the loudest fighter, nor the most dramatic, but his presence was steady and his strategy precise. His invisibility allowed him to disrupt the Titans' ranks, sowing confusion and weakening their defenses. In many ways, this foreshadowed his later role as the god of boundaries and order, not flashy but essential. After 10 years of relentless struggle, the Olympians finally triumphed. The Titans were defeated and cast into Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the earth, guarded forever by the 100-handed ones. Cronus's reign was ended, and the brothers stood victorious. The cosmos was theirs to divide, and the age of the Olympians had begun. The Titanomachy was more than a war. It was the turning of an era. It marked the shift from the rule of chaos and fear to the rule of order and balance. For Hades, it was the moment when he stepped out of his father's shadow and into his destiny, ready to claim his place as one of the 3 rulers of the universe. With the Titans defeated and Cronus cast down into Tartarus, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood together at the dawn of a new age. The war had been long and exhausting, but victory brought with it the question of how to rule the vast universe they had inherited. The cosmos was immense, stretching from the shining heavens above to the dark depths below, and it needed order. The brothers agreed that they would divide it among themselves, each taking a realm that suited his power and destiny. To make the division fair, they drew lots. Zeus, the youngest but most ambitious, drew the sky. It was a realm of thunder, lightning, and endless expanse, a place where his authority could shine brightly over gods and mortals alike. Poseidon, strong and tempestuous, drew the sea. The oceans, with their storms and mysteries, became his domain, filled with waves that mirrored his moods. And Hades, quiet and steady, drew the underworld. It was not a prize many would have chosen, for it was a realm of shadows, of silence, and of the dead. Yet it was also a place of immense importance, for without Hades, the balance of life and death could not be maintained. Though Hades's lot seemed grim compared to the brilliance of the sky or the restless power of the sea, it was essential. He became the ruler of everything beneath the earth, the souls of the departed, the riches hidden in stone, and the boundaries that separated the living from the dead. His role was not to punish or torment, but to govern with fairness and order. In this way, the cosmos was balanced, Zeus above, Poseidon across, and Hades below, each brother holding sway over a vital part of existence. The division of the cosmos was more than a practical arrangement. It was the foundation of the Olympian order. Each brother had his place, his responsibilities, and his destiny. And though Hades's realm was often feared, it was no less noble than the sky or the sea. In fact, it was perhaps the most enduring, for while storms pass and skies change, the underworld remains eternal. Among the three brothers who divided the cosmos, Hades was perhaps the most misunderstood. Zeus ruled with thunder and spectacle, Poseidon with storms and restless seas, but Hades governed in silence. His nature was not loud or boastful, nor was it cruel or vindictive. Instead, he embodied steadiness, restraint, and a kind of solemn dignity that set him apart from the other Olympians. Unlike Zeus, who was notorious for meddling in mortal affairs and pursuing endless romances, Hades rarely left his realm. He did not chase after mortals or interfere with their lives unless necessity demanded it. His presence was felt more as inevitability than intrusion, for every soul, no matter how great or humble, eventually came under his care. This gave him an aura of inevitability, a god who did not need to shout because his authority was absolute. The Greeks feared him, but they also respected him. They avoided speaking his name directly, believing it might draw his attention, and instead used epithets such as Plauton, meaning the wealthy one. This title reflected not only the treasures hidden beneath the earth's gold, silver, and gems, but also the wealth of souls that filled his realm. In this way, Hades was both the god of the dead and the god of riches, a reminder that beneath the surface of life lay both shadow and abundance. His personality was marked by fairness. He did not torment the dead, nor did he seek to punish them. That task belonged to the judges of the underworld and to the regions like Tartarus. Hades's role was to maintain order, to ensure that boundaries were respected, and to keep the living and the dead in their proper places. He was stern, but not malicious, distant, but not heartless. This quiet strength made him unique among the Olympians. While others sought glory, Hades embodied necessity. He was the god who reminded mortals of the limits of life, the inevitability of death, and the importance of balance. His personality was not one of cruelty, but of solemn responsibility, and though he was feared, he was never hated in the way later traditions imagined. One of the most common misunderstandings in Greek mythology is the idea that Hades himself was the god of death. In truth, Hades was not death personified, nor did he wander the earth collecting souls. That role belonged to Thanatos, a minor god who embodied the gentle passing of life into death. Thanatos was the one who guided mortals from the world of the living into the realm of the dead, while Hades was the ruler who received them once they arrived. The difference is subtle but important. Hades was not the act of dying, but the authority over what came after. This distinction shaped how the Greeks viewed him. They feared his name, but they did not see him as a cruel executioner. Hades did not cause death. He simply governed the place where all souls eventually gathered. His role was administrative, almost bureaucratic, ensuring that the boundaries between life and death were respected. Thanatos might be imagined as the messenger who escorts you to the door, while Hades is the one who keeps the door locked once you've entered. Because of this confusion, later traditions often painted Hades as a villain, equating him with darkness, punishment, or even the Christian concept of hell. But in the original Greek understanding, he was far more neutral. He did not delight in suffering, nor did he seek to torment mortals. He was solemn, steady, and necessary, a god who embodied the inevitability of mortality without cruelty. The Greeks even softened his image by calling him Plauton, the wealthy one, reminding themselves that beneath the earth lay treasures as well as shadows. In this way, Hades was connected not only to the dead, but also to the riches of the soil, the fertility of crops, and the abundance that sustained life. He was not death itself, but the balance between endings and beginnings, decay and renewal. Understanding this distinction helps us see Hades more clearly. He was not a monster lurking in the shadows, nor a grim reaper waiting to strike. He was the quiet ruler of the underworld, the keeper of order, and the god who ensured that the cycle of life and death continued without chaos. The realm of Hades was not a single, shapeless shadow, but a vast and carefully organized kingdom beneath the earth. The Greeks imagined the underworld as a place with boundaries, gates, rivers, and regions, each serving a purpose in the great cycle of life and death. To enter, souls first passed through the gates guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound, and beyond those gates stretched a landscape that was both eerie and orderly. At the heart of the underworld lay the great palace of Hades, where he ruled alongside his queen Persephone. This palace was not described in detail by the poets, but it was imagined as a place of solemn majesty, surrounded by darkness, yet filled with the authority of its ruler. From here, Hades oversaw the flow of souls, ensuring that none escaped and that each found its proper place. The underworld was divided into regions that reflected the fate of mortals. There was Tartarus, the deep abyss where the titans and the wicked were punished. There were the Asphodel Meadows, a vast plain where ordinary souls wandered endlessly, neither rewarded nor condemned. There was Elysium, a paradise reserved for heroes and the virtuous, where life was gentle and filled with joy. And beyond even Elysium lay the Isles of the Blessed, a rarer reward for those who had lived 3 virtuous lives, a place of eternal peace. The geography of the underworld was marked by its rivers, each flowing with symbolic meaning. The river Styx was the boundary between the living and the dead, sacred even to the gods, who swore oaths upon its waters. The river Lethe carried forgetfulness, where souls drank to erase their memories of life. The river Acheron was the river of sorrow, Cocytus the river of lamentation, and Phlegethon the river of fire. Together, these rivers formed the veins of the underworld, guiding souls through its many regions. The structure of the underworld reflected the Greek belief in order even within death. It was not chaos, nor was it endless torment. It was a system, a balance, a place where every soul had its destination. Hades himself was the overseer of this structure, ensuring that boundaries were respected and that the living and the dead remained apart. Though feared, the underworld was not imagined as cruel. It was solemn, inevitable, and strangely peaceful, a reminder that death was not the end, but a passage into another realm. In this way, the structure of the underworld mirrored the personality of its ruler, quiet, steady, and essential. The underworld was not only a realm of shadows and wandering souls, it was also shaped by its rivers, each flowing with a meaning deeper than water itself. These rivers were not ordinary streams, but symbolic currents that defined the journey of the dead. To cross into Hades's realm, every soul had to encounter them, and together they formed the veins of the underworld, guiding spirits through its vast and solemn landscape. The most famous of these was the river Styx, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. It was upon this river that the gods themselves swore their most binding oaths, for to break a promise sworn on the Styx was to invite ruin. Mortals imagined its waters as dark and unyielding, a current that no living being could cross without the aid of Chiron, the ferryman. With his small boat, Chiron carried souls across, provided they paid him with a coin placed in their mouth at burial. Without payment, the soul was left to wander the banks, unable to pass. Next was the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Souls who drank from its waters lost all memory of their earthly lives, erasing pain, joy, and identity alike. In some traditions, Lethe was not only for the dead, but also for those preparing to be reborn. For forgetting was necessary before beginning anew. Its waters carried silence, a kind of peace that came from leaving behind the burdens of memory. The river Acheron was known as the river of sorrow. Its currents were heavy with grief, and it was often described as the path that most souls traveled upon entering the underworld. To cross Acheron was to accept the sadness of leaving life behind, a reminder that death was not only an ending, but also a passage marked by mourning. The river Cocytus was the river of lamentation, echoing with the cries of the dead. Its waters were imagined as cold and mournful, flowing with the endless wails of those who had suffered or died unjustly. Cocytus was not a place of punishment, but of sorrow, a reminder that the underworld carried the voices of those who still longed for what they had lost. Finally, there was the river Phlegethon, the river of fire. Unlike the others, its waters burned with flames, a terrifying sight in the land of shadows. It was said to flow through Tartarus, surrounding the wicked with its fiery currents. Phlegethon represented destruction and torment, a boundary that marked the punishment of those who had defied the gods. Together, these 5 rivers gave shape to the underworld. They were not merely obstacles, but symbols of the human experience, oaths and boundaries, memory and forgetfulness, sorrow and lamentation, fire and punishment. Each soul encountered them in some way, and each river reminded mortals of the inevitability of death and the complexity of what lay beyond. For Hades, these rivers were part of the order he maintained. They ensured that the realm was divided, that souls were guided, and that the boundaries between life and death remained firm. In their flowing silence, they reflected the solemn nature of the God who ruled over them, steady and eternal. No description of the underworld would be complete without mentioning its most famous guardian, Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who stood watch at the gates of Hades. Cerberus was no ordinary dog. He was immense, terrifying, and utterly loyal to his master. His duty was simple but vital, to allow souls to enter the realm of the dead, but never to leave. In this way, he embodied the boundary between life and death, ensuring that once a mortal crossed into Hades's domain, there was no return. The poets described Cerberus with 3 heads, each snapping and snarling, though some traditions imagined even more heads, or a serpent's tail, or a mane of snakes. His appearance was meant to inspire fear, but his loyalty was unquestioned. To Hades, Cerberus was not a monster, but a faithful companion, a guardian who carried out his role with unwavering devotion. Mortals, however, saw him as a terror, a beast whose very presence reminded them of the finality of death. Cerberus was not invincible, and several heroes encountered him during their journeys. Heracles, in his 12th labor, was tasked with capturing Cerberus and bringing him to the surface world. With the permission of Hades, Heracles wrestled the great hound, subdued him without weapons, and carried him to King Eurystheus before returning him safely to the underworld. Orpheus, armed with his lyre, lulled Cerberus into sleep with music, slipping past him in his attempt to rescue Eurydice. Aeneas, guided by the Sibyl, fed Cerberus a drugged cake to quiet his fury. Each of these stories showed that while Cerberus was formidable, he could be overcome with strength, cunning, or art, but only temporarily, for his place was always at the gates. Cerberus's role was more symbolic than violent. He was not constantly attacking souls or tearing apart intruders. Rather, he was the embodiment of the rule that death is final. His 3 heads could be seen as representing past, present, and future, or birth, life, and death, reminders that all stages of existence eventually lead to the same gate. His presence gave the underworld its sense of order, reinforcing the boundaries that Hades himself upheld. In the quiet halls of the underworld, Cerberus was a constant figure, a guardian who never rested, never strayed, and never failed. He was the first face that souls saw upon entering, and the last obstacle for any who dared to leave. To mortals, he was a nightmare. To Hades, he was a loyal protector. And in the grand design of the cosmos, he was a reminder that some doors, once closed, are meant to stay shut. Within the vast and solemn realm of Hades, not every soul was treated the same. The underworld was carefully ordered, and the fate of each mortal depended on judgment. This task did not fall directly to Hades himself, for he was the ruler and overseer, but to 3 great judges who stood at the crossroads of eternity, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iolcus. Together, they decided where each soul would dwell, whether in punishment, in endless wandering, or in blissful reward. Minos, once the king of Crete, was regarded as the chief judge. His reputation for wisdom and fairness in life carried into death, and he presided with authority over the final decisions. He listened to the cases of souls, weighed their deeds, and determined their destiny with a calm but unyielding hand. His presence gave the underworld a sense of order, for mortals believed that even in death, justice would be served. Rhadamanthus, brother of Minos, was known for his strictness. He judged the souls of those from Asia, and was said to be uncompromising in his standards. Those who had lived dishonorably found no mercy in his court, while those who had lived with virtue were rewarded. His severity ensured that the underworld was not a place of indulgence, but of accountability, where every action in life carried weight beyond the grave. Iolcus, once king of Aegina, judged the souls of Europeans. He was remembered for his piety and fairness, and his role was to ensure that justice was balanced across the lands. Iolcus was also entrusted with the keys of the underworld, symbolizing his authority and his role as gatekeeper. His presence reminded mortals that the underworld was not only a realm of shadows, but also a place where order was maintained with precision. Together, These three judges formed the tribunal of the dead. They listened to the stories of each soul, considered the deeds of their lives, and assigned them to their proper place: Tartarus for the wicked, the asphodel meadows for the ordinary, and Elysium for the virtuous and heroic. Their judgments were final, and no soul could appeal or escape their decision. The existence of these judges reflected the Greek belief that justice extended beyond life. Mortals might escape punishment in the world of the living, but in death their actions would be weighed without bias. The underworld was not chaos, but a system, and the judges ensured that every soul found its rightful place. For Hades, the judges were essential. They carried out the work of sorting and deciding, allowing him to oversee the realm without becoming entangled in every individual fate. In this way, the underworld functioned smoothly, with boundaries respected and justice upheld. Deep beneath the underworld, far below even the halls of Hades, lay Tartarus, the most dreadful abyss in Greek mythology. It was not simply a place of shadows, but a prison reserved for the greatest offenders against the gods. While ordinary souls wandered the asphodel meadows and heroes rested in Elysium, Tartarus was the domain of torment, where punishment was eternal and escape impossible. The Titans who had fought against Zeus and his siblings during the Great War were cast into Tartarus after their defeat. Guarded by the 100-handed ones, they remained imprisoned in the darkness, their power broken, their rebellion silenced. Tartarus was imagined as a place so deep that an anvil dropped from heaven would fall for 9 days before reaching its floor. It was the furthest boundary of existence, a pit beyond comprehension. Within Tartarus, the wicked endured punishments that matched their crimes. Tantalus, who had betrayed the gods by serving them the flesh of his own son, was condemned to stand in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink. With fruit hanging above that vanished whenever he reached, his torment was endless hunger and thirst, forever unfulfilled. Sisyphus, who tricked death itself and defied the gods, was forced to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to tumble back down each time he neared the top. His punishment was eternal futility, a task without end. Ixion, who attempted to seduce Hera, was bound to a fiery wheel that spun endlessly through the air, a reminder of his arrogance and betrayal. These stories were not merely tales of cruelty, but lessons for mortals. Tartarus represented the consequences of hubris, deceit, and defiance against divine order. The punishments were symbolic, reflecting the nature of each crime. Betrayal met with starvation, trickery met with futility, arrogance met with endless torment. In this way, Tartarus was not chaos but justice, a place where the balance of the cosmos was preserved through eternal consequence. Though Hades ruled the underworld, Tartarus was often imagined as separate, deeper, and more dreadful. It was not his palace but a prison, a place he oversaw but did not dwell in. His role was to ensure that boundaries were respected, that the wicked remained confined, and that the order of life and death was maintained. Tartarus was the shadow beneath the shadow, the reminder that even gods demanded accountability. For mortals, the thought of Tartarus was both terrifying and instructive. It warned them that no matter how clever or powerful they believed themselves to be, the gods could not be deceived forever. And in the quiet of the night, when stories of punishment were told, Tartarus became less a place of horror and more a reminder of the importance of humility, respect, and balance. Not every mortal was destined for eternal torment in Tartarus or eternal joy in Elysium. In fact, most souls found themselves in a far quieter place, the asphodel meadows. This realm was vast and plain, filled with endless fields of pale flowers, where ordinary souls wandered without pain, without pleasure, and without distinction. It was the resting place for those who had lived neither heroically nor wickedly, the countless mortals who had simply lived their lives and passed away. The asphodel meadows were described as shadowy and monotonous, a place where time seemed to stand still. Souls drifted through the fields like faint echoes, stripped of their individuality, existing in a kind of eternal twilight. Unlike Tartarus, there was no punishment here, and unlike Elysium, there was no reward. It was a realm of neutrality, where existence continued without joy or sorrow. The flowers themselves, the asphodels, carried symbolic meaning. In Greek culture, they were associated with death and the afterlife, often planted near graves. Their pale blossoms reflected the subdued nature of the realm, neither vibrant nor lifeless, but somewhere in between. To walk among them was to experience the quiet inevitability of mortality, a reminder that most lives end, not in glory or disgrace, but in simple ordinariness. For Hades, the asphodel meadows were perhaps the most important part of his realm, for they held the majority of souls. He did not torment them, nor did he elevate them. He simply ensured that they remained in peace, bound by the laws of the underworld. The judges had placed them there, and Hades oversaw their eternal wandering, a silent guardian of their endless twilight. The asphodel meadows reflected the Greek understanding of life itself. Not everyone was a hero, not everyone was a villain, and most people lived somewhere in between. This realm was the afterlife of the ordinary, a place where existence continued without drama, without punishment, and without reward. It was not frightening, but it was not joyful either. It was simply the quiet continuation of being. In the stillness of the meadows, the souls drifted forever, a reminder that death was not always a grand conclusion, but often a gentle fading into silence. And in that silence, there was a kind of peace, the peace of knowing that life had been lived, and now it was done. Beyond the shadowy plains of the asphodel meadows, and far from the torments of Tartarus, lay a realm of brightness and peace known as Elysium. This was the paradise reserved for heroes, poets, and mortals who had lived with extraordinary virtue. Unlike the endless wandering of ordinary souls or the punishments of the wicked, Elysium was a place of reward, where life after death was filled with joy, music, and eternal spring. The Greeks imagined Elysium as a land bathed in gentle sunlight, where soft breezes carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the fields were always green. Here, souls lived in harmony, free from pain, sorrow, or toil. It was not a place of idleness, but of fulfillment, where the greatest mortals could continue their pursuits in peace. Warriors who had fought bravely, poets who had inspired, and leaders who had ruled with justice, all found their rest in this blessed realm. Elysium was often described as lying at the edge of the world, far removed from the darkness of the underworld. Some traditions even placed it on the western horizon, where the sun set, suggesting that paradise was not beneath the earth, but beyond it, in a place touched by divine light. The souls who dwelt there were not shadows, but radiant beings, living in a state of eternal contentment. The judges of the underworld determined who was worthy of Elysium, and their decisions reflected the values of Greek society. Courage, wisdom, and honor were rewarded, while selfishness and cruelty led elsewhere. In this way, Elysium became a mirror of mortal ideals, a vision of what life could be if lived with greatness. For Hades, Elysium was part of the balance he maintained. Though his realm was often feared, Elysium showed that death was not only an ending but also a gateway to reward. It reminded mortals that virtue mattered, that their choices in life shaped their eternity. And while most souls wandered the asphodel meadows, the existence of Elysium gave hope, a promise that greatness would not be forgotten. Elysium was not just paradise. It was the dream of immortality through memory and honor. To dwell there was to live forever in peace, surrounded by beauty, a reward that transcended the limits of mortal life. Beyond Elysium, where heroes and virtuous souls found eternal joy, there existed an even rarer and more exalted reward, the Isles of the Blessed. This realm was reserved for the few mortals who had achieved greatness not once, but multiple times. According to tradition, only those who had lived 3 virtuous lives, passing through death and rebirth with honor each time, could reach this paradise. It was the highest reward of the afterlife, a place where perfection was finally attained. The Isles of the Blessed were imagined as shining lands at the edge of the world, touched by gentle breezes and bathed in golden light. Here, the seasons were always kind, the fields fertile, and the air filled with music. Unlike the shadowy asphodel meadows or the solemn halls of the underworld, the Isles were vibrant and alive, a vision of eternal peace where the greatest souls could dwell forever. The Greeks described this realm as a place where heroes continued their pursuits in harmony. Warriors who had fought bravely, poets who had inspired generations, and leaders who had ruled with justice, all found their rest here. It was not simply a reward for one lifetime of virtue, but for repeated excellence, a recognition that true greatness was rare and demanded more than a single life. The Isles of the Blessed reflected the Greek belief in cycles of existence. Souls could be reborn, live again, and strive once more toward virtue. Only those who proved themselves across these cycles were granted entry into this paradise. In this way, the Isles symbolized the ultimate triumph of the human spirit, the idea that through persistence, courage, and honor, one could transcend mortality itself. For Hades, the Isles were part of the balance he maintained. Though most souls wandered the asphodel meadows, and some found joy in Elysium, the Isles stood as the pinnacle of reward, the rarest destination in the underworld. They reminded mortals that greatness was not only possible, but eternal, that the highest virtues could carry them beyond shadow into everlasting light. The Isles of the Blessed were more than paradise. They were the dream of immortality perfected. To dwell there was to live in eternal spring, surrounded by beauty, harmony, and peace. A reward so rare that it became the ultimate aspiration of the soul. Among all the myths connected to Hades, none is more famous or more deeply woven into Greek culture than the story of Persephone's abduction. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of agriculture and fertility, was a maiden of spring, often seen wandering meadows filled with flowers. Her beauty and innocence caught the eye of Hades, who ruled the underworld in solitude. Though he was powerful and respected, his realm was shadowed and silent, and he longed for companionship. One day, as Persephone gathered blossoms in a field, the earth suddenly split open, and Hades emerged in his chariot drawn by black horses. Without warning, he seized her and carried her down into the depths of the underworld. The meadow closed behind them, leaving only silence, and Persephone was gone. Demeter, her mother, was devastated. She searched the earth endlessly, refusing to let crops grow, and the world fell into famine. Mortals suffered, and even the gods grew concerned, for without Demeter's blessing, the earth could not sustain life. Eventually, Zeus intervened, sending Hermes to negotiate Persephone's return. But there was a complication. In the underworld, Persephone had eaten a few seeds of the pomegranate, a fruit sacred to Hades. By the laws of the cosmos, anyone who tasted food in the realm of the dead was bound to it. Persephone could not fully leave, for she now belonged to both worlds. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother, bringing spring and summer to the earth, and part of the year with Hades, bringing autumn and winter. This cycle explained the changing seasons. The joy of Persephone's return brought growth and warmth, while her descent into the underworld brought decline and cold. For Hades, Persephone was more than a queen. She was the balance to his solitude, the presence that softened the silence of his realm. Their union was not one of cruelty, but of inevitability, a myth that reflected the cycles of nature, the balance of life and death, and the eternal rhythm of the seasons. The story of Persephone's abduction became one of the most enduring myths of Greece, reminding mortals that even in loss there is renewal, and even in shadow there is light. The story of Persephone's abduction did not end with her descent into the underworld. It became the foundation of one of the most important myths in Greek culture, the cycle of the seasons. When Persephone was taken by Hades, her mother Demeter, goddess of agriculture, fell into grief so deep that she refused to let the earth bear fruit. Crops withered, fields lay barren, and mortals faced famine. The gods themselves grew concerned, for without Demeter's blessing, life could not continue. Zeus eventually intervened, sending Hermes to negotiate Persephone's release. Yet the pomegranate seeds Persephone had eaten bound her to the underworld, and she could not remain entirely free. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother above the earth, and part of the year with Hades below. This agreement created the rhythm of nature itself. When Persephone returned to Demeter, the world blossomed. Spring arrived with her presence, and summer followed, filled with warmth and abundance. Crops flourished, flowers bloomed, and mortals rejoiced in the bounty of the earth. But when Persephone descended once more to the underworld, Demeter mourned, and the earth reflected her sorrow. Autumn brought decline, and winter brought barrenness, as the goddess withheld her gifts until her daughter's return. This cycle explained the changing seasons, tying the natural world to the myth of Hades and Persephone. It was not simply a story of abduction, but a story of balance, of loss and renewal, of the eternal rhythm that governs life. The Greeks saw in this myth a reflection of their own lives, joy followed by sorrow, growth followed by decline, and the promise that even in the darkest winter, spring would return. For Hades, the cycle was a bond between his realm and the world above. Persephone's presence brought harmony to the underworld, while her absence brought longing to Demeter. Together, their story reminded mortals that life and death, growth and decay were inseparable, each giving meaning to the other. The cycle of the seasons was not only a myth, but a truth woven into the fabric of existence. It taught that endings are never final, that every descent is followed by a return, and that even in shadow there is always the promise of light. Though Hades ruled the underworld with quiet authority, there were moments when mortals dared to enter his realm. These journeys were rare, dangerous, and often driven by quests or desperate love. Among the most famous were the visits of Heracles, Orpheus, and Theseus, three heroes whose stories revealed both the power of Hades and the courage of those who faced him. Heracles, in his 12th and final labor, was commanded to bring Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, to the surface world. With the permission of Hades himself, Heracles descended into the underworld. He wrestled Cerberus with his immense strength, subduing the beast without weapons, and carried him to King Eurystheus before returning him safely to his master. This labor showed Heracles' unmatched bravery, but it also revealed Hades' fairness. The god allowed the hero to complete his task so long as Cerberus was not harmed, demonstrating that even in the realm of shadows, order and respect prevailed. Orpheus, the poet and musician, entered the underworld not for glory but for love. His wife, Eurydice, had died, and his grief was so deep that he sought to bring her back. With his lyre, Orpheus played music so beautiful that it softened the hearts of Hades and Persephone. They agreed to let Eurydice return, but only if Orpheus did not look back at her until they reached the surface. Overcome by doubt and longing, he turned too soon, and Eurydice vanished forever. This story showed Hades not as cruel, but as willing to grant mercy, though bound by the unbreakable laws of his realm. Theseus, the king of Athens, ventured into the underworld with his companion Pirithous. Their reckless plan was to abduct Persephone herself, believing they could claim her as a bride. But their arrogance was punished. Hades trapped them in the underworld, binding them to the chair of forgetfulness. Theseus was eventually rescued by Heracles during his own descent, but Pirithous remained forever imprisoned. This tale revealed Hades' stern justice. While he could show mercy to love and courage, he would not tolerate hubris or disrespect. Each of these encounters reflected a different aspect of Hades' nature. To Heracles, he was fair and honorable. To Orpheus, he was merciful, yet bound by law. To Theseus, he was stern and unforgiving. Together, these stories showed that Hades was not a villain, but a ruler who upheld balance, rewarding respect and punishing arrogance. His realm was not easily entered, and those who dared to cross its boundaries learned that death was not a place for mortal ambition. The realm of Hades was not empty, nor was it filled only with wandering souls. It was populated by strange spirits and fearsome creatures, each serving a role in the balance of the underworld. These beings were not always enemies, nor always allies, but together they gave the realm its atmosphere of mystery and awe. Among the most haunting were the shades, the spirits of the dead themselves. They drifted through the asphodel meadows, pale and silent, shadows of their former lives. They were not violent, but their presence reminded mortals of the inevitability of death. To encounter them was to see the faint echo of humanity, stripped of its passions and desires. There were also the Erinyes, or Furies, terrifying spirits of vengeance. They pursued those who had committed crimes against family, especially those who had shed kindred blood. With serpents in their hair and whips in their hands, they embodied divine justice, ensuring that even in death, guilt could not be escaped. Their presence in the underworld was a reminder that morality extended beyond life. The Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, were monstrous beings imprisoned in Tartarus, guardians of the Titans. With 50 heads and 100 arms, they hurled boulders and shook the earth with their strength. Though terrifying, They were allies of Zeus and Hades, ensuring that the defeated Titans remained bound in the abyss. Other creatures lurked in the shadows. The Impausi, vampiric spirits who haunted mortals, were said to wander between worlds, feeding on fear. The Charis winged spirits of violent death hovered over battlefields, eager to carry away the souls of the slain. These beings were not rulers like Hades, but reminders of the darker forces that accompanied mortality. And of course, there was Cerberus, the faithful guardian of the gates, whose 3 heads snarled at any who tried to escape. Alongside him were lesser spirits who guided souls, ferried them across rivers, or kept watch over boundaries. Each had a role. Each maintained the order of the realm. The underworld was not chaos, but it was not gentle either. Its spirits and monsters reflected the many faces of death: silence, vengeance, punishment, and fear. Together, they gave the realm its depth, ensuring that mortals respected the boundaries between life and death. For Hades, these beings were part of his kingdom, not rivals, but extensions of his authority. They carried out tasks that maintained balance, reminding mortals that the underworld was vast, complex, and eternal. Hades was rarely worshipped openly in ancient Greece, but he was honored in solemn rituals tied to death, funerals, and mystery cults. Unlike Zeus or Apollo, who had grand temples and festivals, Hades's cult was quiet, understated, and often hidden. His name itself was avoided, replaced with euphemisms like Plauton, the wealthy one, to soften the fear of invoking the ruler of the dead. Shrines dedicated to Hades were few. His most notable cult center was the Oracle of the Dead in Thesprotia, where mortals sought communion with spirits through necromantic rites. Here, Hades was invoked alongside Persephone, and rituals often involved offerings of black animals, libations of wine, honey, or milk, and prayers spoken in hushed tones. These ceremonies reflected the belief that Hades was not a god of cruelty, but of boundaries, ensuring the proper passage of souls. Hades was also honored during funeral ceremonies, where sacrifices and prayers acknowledged his authority over the departed. The Greeks believed that showing respect to Hades ensured safe passage for loved ones into the underworld. Offerings were modest compared to those given to other gods, emphasizing solemnity rather than grandeur. In some traditions, Hades appeared in mystery cults, particularly those connected to Persephone and Demeter. These rites explored the cycle of death and rebirth, teaching initiates that the underworld was not only a place of endings, but also of renewal. Through these mysteries, Hades was seen as part of the cosmic balance, a necessary counterpart to life and fertility. Though his worship was limited, Hades's presence was deeply felt. He was not adored with festivals or music, but he was respected with silence, offerings, and reverence. His cult reflected the Greek attitude toward death, fearful yet accepting, acknowledging that the god of the underworld was essential to the order of existence. For Hades, worship was not about glory or spectacle. It was about respect, solemnity, and the recognition that all mortals, no matter their station, would one day enter his realm. Though Hades was once feared in ancient Greece, his image has transformed across centuries, finding new life in literature, art, and modern storytelling. The god who ruled the underworld quietly and fairly has often been reshaped into darker or more dramatic forms, reflecting how cultures after the Greeks came to view death itself. In Roman times, Hades was more commonly called Pluto, emphasizing his role as the wealthy one, tied to the riches beneath the earth. This softer name carried into later traditions, where he was sometimes seen less as a terrifying figure and more as a symbol of hidden abundance. Yet, as Christianity spread, the underworld was reimagined as hell, and Hades was often confused with its ruler, turning him into a villain in stories far removed from his original Greek character. In modern culture, Hades appears in countless works. In literature, he is often portrayed as a stern but complex figure, sometimes cruel, sometimes misunderstood. In films and television, he is given dramatic flair, often cast as an antagonist, though occasionally shown with nuance. In video games and novels, he has become a character of fascination, embodying mystery, power, and the inevitability of death. His realm, the Underworld, continues to inspire depictions of shadowy landscapes, gates guarded by monsters, and rivers flowing with symbolic meaning. Yet beneath these portrayals, the essence of Hades remains. He is not simply a villain, but a reminder of balance, of the boundary between life and death, of the quiet authority that governs what lies beyond. Modern culture may dramatize him, but the ancient truth endures. Hades is not cruelty, but necessity, not chaos, but order. His legacy shows how humanity continues to wrestle with the idea of death. Sometimes we fear it, sometimes we romanticize it, and sometimes we soften it with stories of love and renewal. Through Hades, we see our own reflections, our anxieties, and our hopes for what lies beyond the final gate. And so, as the story of Hades drifts from ancient worship into modern imagination, it reminds us that myths are never truly gone. They live on in the tales we tell, reshaped for each generation, carrying with them the timeless truths of mortality and meaning. And with that, the tale of Hades comes to rest for tonight. His legacy stretches from the ancient world into our own, a quiet reminder of balance and inevitability. May the shadows of the underworld fade into dreams, and may the peace of night carry you gently into sleep. Good night.